Hello and welcome to the Westcity Church podcast. If you'd like to get to know us more, find us at westcitychurch.com.au. We really hope that you're encouraged by today's message.
I want to talk about my grandpa this morning. So last month, my grandpa passed away at 95 years old. And my brothers who live, because my grandparents live in England, in Cornwall, it's sort of right down the bottom. And my brothers that do live in England drove all the way down there to visit him in hospital, and they set up a big family FaceTime, because half of the family are here in Australia. So we all, which he just thought was the most amazing technological. He's like, wow, everybody's on, because we FaceTime them, just one of us, but he's not done that before. So yeah, my brothers set that up, and all the family was on there. And we kind of knew, and you could feel that this was the last time that we were going to speak to him. So it came, and he went round, how's this? And he remembered something about everybody's life and checked in with everybody, and then it sort of came his time to say something. And he said, all I really want for any of you is to live your life following Jesus. That's what I've done, and that's led me every step of my life, and that's all that I really want for you. And my grandparents, certainly I could say for my whole life, have prayed for the family every morning. They have their routine. Someone goes down and makes tea. They go back up to bed. They do their daily reading, and then they say their prayers, and they pray for each of us. And over the years, for context, I have 5 siblings, so over the years, people get a partner or have a child, and the list just gets longer, and they take their time and they pray for everybody. And I would imagine that he was still doing that when he was in hospital as well. During COVID, he took the opportunity to write down his memoirs. So he wrote them down with pen on paper, and my grandma typed them up for him, because he likes that it keeps us connected, but he could never really get on side with technology. So they typed that up, and Grandma scanned all these pictures and put that in. And I learned something new about him when I read the memoirs, which was that as a child, he actually lived in a home of domestic violence. I never knew. And one of the things that he tells in there was taking his younger siblings out in the middle of the night to walk around the streets until they felt that it was safer to come home. Now, as someone who works in social services, I can tell you that the stats for men who've grown up in domestic violence becoming perpetrators is really, really high, but not Grandpa. He lived his life following Jesus, loving his family. What else did I want to say about Grandpa? Oh, and through the memoirs, it was his whole life laid out, and he did some really wonderful things. He, together with my grandma, they started a Christian retreat centre in the hills of Wales, and they literally built it from the bricks. Them and 2 other couples, they had this vision, and they went out and they built it. They built a chapel, and someone's actually written a book about it, because that retreat centre went on to be known as a place of revival, where different leaders had breakthroughs and people coming there, and lots of prayer, and just some really cool stories out of that. He was in the prison fellowship for a very long time. They would go in and serve the prisoners and serve the families of the prisoners. And then even just in his own life, he was the coolest guy. He just loved life and getting the most out of it. He would always want to learn new skills. So like some of the things in the memoirs is like, he learned to make wine, he learned to carve wood. He built every house they had. He built these just magnificent. He built us the best tree house, and he landscaped an entire pond, and like there's all pictures. He's digging out the thing and laying that, and he really just loved life. But I think as I know that he closed his eyes, laid to rest, what I saw that I knew already but was convinced about is that a life with Jesus is a life so worth living that someone could get to 95 years and have that peace and say, that's my life well lived, and that's all I would really want for you. So when we do the communion invite at the end of the service, there's a line that says, we're inviting you to the table, those who love God and those who want to know him more. And I just encourage you, if you're someone that wants to know God more, I just promise you that a life with Jesus, even with all of its ups and downs, will be a life that's well lived. Thanks.
Get up here, so I'll do that. And I wasn't sure if Josh was going to make an appearance and come and do a bit of a handover, so thanks for the cue, Kai, wherever he went. Well done. Morning, everyone. I feel like there's always a few empty rows up the front here and then everyone. So like there is seats up here if you're sitting kind of uncomfortably and you want to come forward. There's definitely some seats dotted around at the front. I feel like you're all way over there, so I want to come back down there. I'm just going to open by reading a passage, mostly so I don't get entirely distracted before we get into the word. So at least we've got that far, and if we go nowhere else, no one can say I didn't start in the word. We're going to read from Exodus 20. If anyone knows where we're at in the series, it's because we're speaking about Sabbath today. But Exodus 20 is where you'll find the 10 Commandments. And from verse 8 to verse 11, remember the Sabbath day and keep it holy. 6 days you shall labour and do all your work. But the seventh day is the Sabbath to the Lord your God. You shall not do any work, you, your son or your daughter or your male or female servant, your livestock, or the alien resident in your towns. For in 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth and all that is in them, but rested on the seventh day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and consecrated it. So for those who weren't around, I awkwardly said to someone last night, I was like, oh, it was like 3 or 4 weeks ago or something like, maybe 6 weeks ago, and then went, wait, it was the beginning of December, so that was like 3 or 4 months ago that I last spoke here. I'm really good with time, can you tell? Here's a bit of a catch-up. I really don't know how to introduce myself, where I've come from or what I do, so we'll have to figure that one out later. But I have definitely, as Josh mentioned, my family and I have decided to stick around. We like you guys, and it's been fun. So it's good to be here on that note this morning, but it's also a little bit nerve-wracking because now I'm like, well, I kind of want you guys to like me now. Last time was like this, no skin in the game. I'm like, I can say whatever. And now I'm like, oh, well, I've got to, be back here next week, and so you can all tell me what you thought of what I had to say. So if I seem a bit more nervous, that's why. So I was thinking about Sabbath and the practice, and one thing I do really appreciate about this series, Exploring Practices, is that by nature, practice means we don't have it figured out, and that's kind of what's been reflected by everyone who's got up to share. And we're figuring it out together, and I hope that's what we're going to do a little bit this morning. We're going to take a little bit of a different tack and talk a little bit about some of the things that have been challenging me around this concept of Sabbath lately. And one of them is that it seems to be a bit of a buzzword at the moment in the kind of Christian community. It's like the 2021 equivalent of apple cider right now. Like everyone is lighting a candle on Friday night, going off grid and doing their Sabbath thing, and who cares what anyone else thinks. I'm doing it. This is my newfound gonna solve all the problems in my life and everyone else's life thing. I'm doing a Sabbath. Awesome, except there's kind of a whole nation that we can probably think of that regularly practices a personal Sabbath, and it hasn't exactly solved all of their issues and created world peace. So we know it's not the everything, right? But that said, it is a little bit of like the Ron Burgundy of statutes in the Bible, like kind of a big deal. You can't ignore the fact that from start to finish, Sabbath is so often reflected by God as a core principle, something that he instructs his people to do, something that actually has such a place of significance that it became a practice even in like societies formed around Christian values that no longer have very much kind of surface level reflected in that we still have Sunday trading laws. Like, these things are still kind of a big deal. That God's judgment even is so often reflected and connected as being related to the lack or the failure to practice Sabbath by his people. Even the amount of years that the people of God were exiled into the wilderness was a reflection, a direct consequence of the lack of Sabbath years that had been practiced. It's like correlated the amount of time that they spent in exile was the added up number of years that they had failed to practice the Sabbath years. So in God's mind, this is kind of a big deal. We're told that we're to keep the Sabbath holy, as in set apart. When we read the scripture, it usually connects those two things. Keep the Sabbath holy, not just keep the Sabbath, but keep it holy. Keep it holy because I am holy. That's what God says to his people. There's a New Testament phrase that quite likely is a deliberate connection, an echo of this phrase, and we'll come back to that. Maybe some of you have been around long enough to remember a time when keeping the Sabbath was such a big deal that you weren't to go to the movies, or even wearing informal clothes was considered too profane for the Sabbath. Maybe you remember a time when you definitely couldn't work, but you couldn't mow the lawn or play board games. It was actually a thing, I've heard. I wasn't around that long ago, I don't think. Maybe it's because of this, how it became so much about what you couldn't do, that the majority of what we've got as a lingering legacy of that is some weird trading laws and mostly disdain or disregard for the idea of keeping a day of rest. I wonder, though, if today's fad is kind of at risk of becoming just like that, another thing that we need to do. Another list of limits or laws, or at worst, a task to tick off, or even just feel guilty about not ticking off. There's a New Testament reference that I found helpful in exploring these ideas. It's in Hebrews chapter 4, and in true Hebrews form, it requires multiple layers of translation to even figure out what it's trying to say. But I'll read the passage, it's 1-4, and then we'll try to decipher the weird poetry language that Hebrews uses. Therefore, while the promise of entering his rest is still open, let us take care that none of you should seem to have failed to reach it. For indeed, the good news came to us just as to them, but the message they heard, speaking of the people of God that had, under Moses, not kept God's law, came to them. The message they heard but did not benefit them because they were not united by faith with those who listened. For we who have believed enter rest just as God has said. For we who have believed enter rest just as God has said. I find that interesting They failed to enter in because they had not united themselves with those who had heard in faith. And that's a little bit of what I want to dig into here. So Hebrews, this chapter, hails back to Moses and the people of God wandering in the wilderness just after they have left a time of being under immense oppression under Egypt's rule. They were held in slavery for generations in Egypt and now find themselves in the wilderness, liberated by God, but not yet where God is calling them to, trying to find their way. And one of these things that God speaks to them about doing is to keep a Sabbath. If Sabbath was just about what not to do, well, they didn't really have much of what not to do by that stage. They didn't really have much excess to manage. It wasn't about what they were doing on the outside. It was about God shaping in them the kind of people that they were going to become. And that's what I think this passage of Hebrews is getting at, the promise of entering rest. So if we could move from prohibition to promise and take a look at what the image or the picture of Sabbath is supposed to be, we might get a step closer to experiencing it as the life-giving practice that all of the sacraments that God has instituted are supposed to be. There's two ancient world concepts around this word rest that are worth understanding as we explore Sabbath. The first is that the promise of rest in a world of conquest and oppression is as much political as it is practical. Peace was a powerful motif in the ancient world, as it probably is today in a lot of parts of the world, when you have only experienced conflict and the threat of violence, when you have only experienced a nation at war or under the threat of being invaded. See, the power-hungry regimes of the ancient world were an ever-present threat. And so the promise of rest, and you'll see it if you read some of the books like Kings and Chronicles, where it speaks of a nation under the rule of certain kings. It would say God had given them a time of rest where there was no threat from any side. It's actually talking about a time of peace where there was no nation trying to, say, invade them and annex them or make them the 51st state or something. Probably is. But the promise of having an era of peace actually comes with another promise, because when there was no threat of violence or invasion or oppression, the people could turn their energy to things like productivity and enjoyment, like planting vineyards, which took like a certain number of years to actually see the harvest and then so things that made life enjoyable were only possible under peace. And so when you read in the Bible the promise of things like, wine or say like milk or things that actually required them to raise a calf to the point where it was able to, all of those things take time, and time is only the privilege of people who are at peace. The time to do those things that look like all the promises of God. And so when God speaks about entering this promise of peace, it's not just an, inner Zen, it's not just something personal, but it actually means existing under the circumstances where you might have the time to find your inner Zen. Does that make sense? The second concept, and it's kind of connected, is from the very beginning of Genesis, this word rest comes into the picture, and it is because the Genesis narrative is set up so that in the ancient world it would have been seen as a kind of temple being created. And when a temple was built in the ancient world, it was for the purpose of creating space for that God to dwell, so that then the people whose God that was could go to the temple, usually up a mountain or something, go up the mountain, and they would be able to meet with God there. They would be able to encounter God, or maybe seek wisdom or guidance or some sort of spiritual intervention. And that was why they built temples. Well, when God describes creation as a temple and then him resting, it would be said that if a nation was going really well, it would be said that the God was resting on, he was on his throne. Their God, their version of or whatever, was resting on the throne at that time. So when it says that God finishes the 6 days of work of creation and then rests, it's an image of God actually finding his place in this temple that he has created for us to encounter him in. And for God to be resting on the seventh day isn't just about God taking a break because he's done a whole lot of hard work. It's actually about God taking his rightful place on the throne, that in the temple, in the creation that he's created, that we would be able to enter in and encounter him there. What is important about that is when you track that word from the Hebrew right through, and I'm going to save you the word study, but right through into the New Testament, the word that is used to translate it, you get all these different words that we use in Scripture, but it's all the same concept, and it's everything from being on the throne to being still, to remain, to dwell, and to abide. And you might be thinking of a particular verse or concept or something you know from Scripture that would give you a whole different understanding to right now, if you were to consider it in terms of abiding, resting, remaining. And Sabbath is like a big picture frame around all of that. It's saying the invitation to Sabbath is an invitation to enter into all of that promise that's laid out from the beginning of Scripture. There's a different word in Hebrew and in Greek for sleep and for doing nothing. That's not what this rest is talking about. Speaking of word studies, I said I was going to come back to that, be made holy because I am holy. And the New Testament version, or the New Testament kind of echo that we hear, is be made perfect as I am perfect. It's not perfect as in everything, perfect, immaculate, like we imagine perfect in our modern context. It's perfect as in telos, as in the end, the way everything is, or everything is to play out. It's like that end picture, perfection, the whole culmination of all things the way God intended. It isn't about getting everything right, it's about getting everything in the right place. It's a destination. The Sabbath is a day. It also has an annual iteration, Sabbath years, and even a bigger picture than that, the Jubilee, which was the Sabbath of Sabbaths, 7 lots of 7 years, that would then be this greater celebration. It's like Sabbath has always had a trajectory. It isn't just, it's like a starting point. It isn't just about the rule, it's about where it goes. When we open passages like Isaiah 56 or 58 that speak about the Sabbath, what's interesting to note is there is always context around justice, equity, and the treatment of others and how it's supposed to look, always. I looked up every reference. I was like, this is what took me all week. I was like checking that I could say this after having looked through like every one of them is in the context of there being a discussion around justice and what equity looks like. It's either the chapter before or it's right there. Sometimes it reads like, don't mistreat your neighbor and do right by, seek justice. and then kind of like a pause, and keep the Sabbath. But it's not two separate concepts. It's actually that this is tied up. Sabbath is tied up with how we treat others. And this is why Sabbath as a personal practice is never going to solve all the world's problem. But the picture, the promise that we're given through Sabbath, well, I believe that is the good news. That is the thing that is going to heal the whole world. And so there's a tension between those two, and that's where we get to play. That's the part that we get to actually participate in. So Sabbath is a vision, like a demo model of the kingdom, right? And we were always supposed to see it, to taste and see, to experience what the world would be like if we could actually live into the promises of God in a way that would transform our everyday living. Then that could be something that would be life-changing. If we actually took seriously the way that Sabbath names all the things that we have allowed to creep in, the excesses, the things that, we feel like we're too important to put down for a day, the things that we think that we need, or the things that we can never have enough of. It got me thinking about the many articles and things I've read about maybe a particular subset, but a lot of the billionaires in the world right now. And one particular one that apparently works 140 hours a week or something ridiculous. Don't you have enough? Isn't it enough? Do you not have enough yet? The most anyone in the whole world has, and it's still not enough? Imagine having everything and it not being enough. How tragic a way to live. To have everything that anyone could ever want and still be so bereft of having satisfaction that you would work 140 hours a week to do what? I don't even know. And it's not just that particular one, it's so many of, the people who maybe have a lot of power, or a lot of privilege, or a lot of... you see, one of the things that strikes me as really interesting is that the people who struggle with rates of illicit drug abuse, rates of suicide, all kinds of things that probably indicate a really difficult existence, are highest in those that have nothing and those that have everything. You can find that interesting. That you can, it makes sense when life is hard and you don't have the things that sorry guys, I feel like I'm moving forward because you're all back there. But that would cause, someone to seek ways to escape, but to have everything has the same impact on our well-being. It's almost like God knew we needed to learn that we have limits. Proverbs 29, there's a little line that you might have learned like I did in your early Christian life, that it says, without vision the people perish. Did anyone learn that version of it? Okay, maybe it's just the evangelical crew in the, So it's one version of the Bible that, so the King James, that translates it that way. The rest all translate it, cast off restraint, which is a much better translation of the word. Without vision, the people cast off restraint. And I feel like that's what we see in a world of excess and too much, when so many have not enough, but a collection and, a lot of people in the West have more than enough or too much, that without vision, without this vision that God sets out, that we're supposed to see and live into through the practice of Sabbath, without that, we are inclined to cast off restraint, to pursue something. We are wired to pursue something bigger than us. And if we don't set that desire on the things of God and God's picture, then we'll pursue something bigger, and it's not always healthy. So what hope do we have in a world where everything tells us that what we have is not enough? Literally, like an entire marketing degree will just tell you how to tell people that they don't have enough. Don't miss out. You know, that whole idea that things are scarce, that you need to be, you're not enough. Like, in a world that is wired to tell us that we're not enough, how do we then become people who live as if we already have everything that we need, even when we actually don't always have everything that we need? How do we learn to appreciate what we do have and also not live in a way that causes others not to have what they should have? See, this is where good news works both ways. It's not just about, us pretending that everything's all good when it's not. The good news is that Sabbath was not supposed to be practiced by the people who had the least. It was to be received by the people who had the least. You notice that when the outline of the law like in Exodus and Leviticus is spoken about, it says that you're to do no work, neither are your, and it goes off to list a whole lot of things, but that tells you who it's speaking to. It's speaking to the people who have people serving them in their house, to the people who have land and who have animals and who have sons and daughters. These are the people who have power and privilege in their life, and they're told to set that aside for one day a week, not to impose anything on the people who otherwise would be required to work, would be required to serve, would be required to be subservient to them in their household. If Sabbath is not imposed on those who don't have enough but received, then it's good news. It's not another requirement. It's not another way to make someone feel guilty, like you shouldn't be working your 3 jobs that you work to make ends meet when you have to pay rent, and all those examples you can think of when we start talking about Sabbath, and you think, well, practically that just doesn't work for a lot of people. No, and it shouldn't. But it definitely needs to for the ones who can. And that doesn't absolve any of us who maybe feel like we're like, okay, well, I'm not a landlord. Maybe you are, but maybe, I'm not like a farmer. I don't have cattle to make rent. Like, I'm probably not one of those people. I mean, how are you one of those people? That's always the question. In what ways can I begin to practice Sabbath in my life, put down things where I hold requirements over other people in ways that might be detrimental to them? How might I put down the desire to be more productive or have more, or how might I live into the reality that I am enough as God made me? That I have enough, that I can have enough just by doing and being obedient to God. This is where I like the terminology sacrament for Sabbath, because sacrament is practice that becomes presence and promise at the same time. It's about God, by his holy work, doing something through a very simple thing that we can do. It doesn't mean that we are probably going to have a whole 24-hour period where the whole world stops, because that's not where we're at. I remember being in Jerusalem looking out my hotel window when I was doing a study, archaeology unit there, and it was a Sabbath, and I looked outside, and there was people everywhere in the park, just families picnicking. It was I'd looked out the window the day before, and it was a totally different scene. but it was amazing how different that one thing, how the whole city felt different. And I've told you before, I recognise that it's not in any way perfect, but that one thing meant that families were out with their parents in the park. There was this incredible picture of people enjoying life together. But we're probably not in a place where we can make the whole world stop and do that. But we do stop for a couple of hours on a Sunday morning. It's why, even though I have a lot of thoughts around organised religion and how, difficult sometimes church life can be, and you'll never catch me saying that Sundays aren't important. Because I feel like we have an opportunity to create a space every week when we come together and choose to put aside some time that might look something like a Sabbath. That might look something like a place where people can come whether they have or haven't got enough of whatever they need, where people can come whether they have needs and people need people to pray for them, or whether they want to pray for people and have something that week just to give or to offer space for people, wherever we come from. We can bring those things together in a space on a Sunday. It doesn't have to be a Sunday, but we're here, aren't we? It's a start. The challenge is to consider how we might practice Sabbath in the context of our lives, whether that be pursuing the big picture vision of that reality that everyone has enough, that everyone can celebrate, that everyone can rest, that everyone can be at peace, or whether it's considering how in your own life you might be considering putting down things that drive you to continue to pursue more, or to not be able to take or enter into that rest for yourself. One of the ways that I've found helpful in practicing Sabbath is through prayer, and even through things as simple as the Lord's Prayer. The Our Father who is in heaven, hallowed be your name. Your kingdom come, your will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Think of that Sabbath picture, that promise that everyone would be at rest, that everyone would be able to celebrate. On earth as it is in heaven. And then the prayer part comes in. Give us today our daily bread. It's not wrong for those who need to seek what they need. It's not wrong for those who sometimes have to work just to make ends meet, or to ask for what they need. Give us today our daily bread. Forgive us our sins as we forgive those who sin against us. This isn't just about guilt and shame and condemnation, but actually very practically in the time that Jesus spoke this, speaking into a system that kept people bound up in oppression. So if you had wronged someone, then you owed them. And if you owed them, then you might owe them your life. And if you owed them your life, you might actually end up literally enslaved to their household. And so by speaking, forgive others and be forgiven, then like the Sabbath of Sabbath's Jubilee, it's speaking into that freedom. And lead us not into temptation. So what is the temptation? The temptation to do more, to seek more, to want more than what we should. The temptation of self-importance, to think, I can't put this down for a time. The temptation to not consider what might be excess in our life, or what might be provision that we have that could go to others, or the temptation to think that we're not deserving of having enough. The temptation to forsake the Sabbath. It's not about a day. It's about a purpose and a promise. It's about where we're all going and how we get there. The other thing I love about sacraments is that as we practice in part, we're made whole. It's what I love about the table. That we practice something that is ultimately a meal, the image of the wedding feast, the image of where, everything ends, but in a tiny way that would seem insignificant if it wasn't for God's hand on it. That we practice that in one part, but as we do it, all of us together, we actually become an example of what the thing speaks about. As we, individual pieces, practice it, we become one body, just like the promise that we are made whole. So as we come around the table this morning, I'll just ask the servers to get ready and come and join.
How good was that message? Thank you so much for joining us. Each week at Westcity, we say a benediction together. We do this because we believe that the purpose of the church is to be a caring community for the world, and that as we go and serve others, we enter into Christ's work of welcome, restoration and healing, both for us and others. We believe that in doing so, we get to see and encounter Christ. So let's say the benediction together. We come together as the church to be reminded of the go of Christ. So we will go out and feed the hungry, go out and clothe the naked, go out and fight for justice, go out and end oppression, go out and proclaim anew the old story, go out and associate with those who don't look like us, think like us, act like us, and don't even like us. And we'll do it all in the name of the one who sent us. His name is Jesus.